Can't believe that last lecture was 10 minutes. I thought I was going quickly. Anyway, I'll try to speed it up. When you look at strong and weak networks, when you look at the pattern, as you can see, what happens with strong networks, that a lot of elements are clumped together. There's normally more than one path to get to a person. And then when you look at antisocial networks, you can see that there's far separation. You see a lot more line segments and things like that. And so in terms of network topology, we're concerned about the shape. We want tight networks if you want a lot of activity. We also want networks to be open because we want to be able to grow and we want to be able to connect outside. Not only that, but open networks means I don't have any boundary limits. And then externalities of how we connect to others. This is how you make big networks. Network here, ta-da! They're linked together. Now we're all one huge network. And that's a really, really important concept in entrepreneurship. When we talk about influencers, we're talking about people who have networks. And when they bridge those networks to you, all of a sudden, that becomes your network. Here's an example of two kinds of structure. This is what Twitter is good for. Twitter is about spread. And so as you can see, the Twitter pattern is very loose, but it's wide-ranging. On the other hand, something like a graphic novel that I want people to adopt, as you can see, it's heavily dependent on a few opinions that impact a lot of people. And so when you want somebody to adopt something or to buy something, you're typically looking for that person who can impact a lot of people. And so the network patterns you're looking for are a lot more different. For those of you who took leadership class with myself or Professor Harada, you probably remember that in an organization, power isn't necessarily title, because title tends to go top down and be hierarchical. The person who has a lot of power is a person who can reach out and touch a lot of people. And that's what they mean about forming your own networks. There's also something called the diffusion of innovations theory, and that means social networks have a very important role in spreading new ideas. Although reading the internet, some of them are good and some of it bad. One thing that happens in startups is you are under such a stressful situation. What do? People start to band into groups, and the communication between these networks isn't very tight. And you see a lot of startups that just splinter apart. And Silicon Valley would have never become what it was if it wasn't for networking. If somebody had created, for those of you who take TEM400 with me, I talk about this, but Putin put $3.2 billion into Innovation City, and he was thinking he's going to duplicate Silicon Valley, and it flopped. Silicon Valley got created because it was bottom up, not because it was top down. When you're top down and force people to do things, they don't feel like they're a part of it. And so that's the thing about your network. When it's bottom up, then the people want this sort of thing, and it grows on its own. Here's an example of Silicon Valley. The Big Bang event in Silicon Valley happened when William Shockley, who was a Nobel Prize winner, and also a white supremacist. Yeah, Stanford doesn't talk a lot about Shockley, but he did know talent, and he hired 8 very, very brilliant people, and those 8 guys founded Silicon Valley. In that picture is Bob Noyce, who founded Fairchild Semiconductor and then went on to form Intel. Eugene Kleiner is in the picture. Kleiner started Kleiner Perkins, one of the biggest VC firms. That's how that whole Sand Hill Road thing got started in Palo Alto. But 71% of the companies can trace their lineage all the way back to Fairchild. That's how it was founded. Here's another network pattern that you could just look at, and this is how patents were assigned. And so as you could see how they spread out based on a few patents and a few investors, and that's because patents build on themselves. When you look at networks, there are key elements that you find at critical points, and that's you have gatekeepers, you have liaisons, bridges, isolates, those are people who aren't connected to anything, and influencers. And so when you're working in a network, each one has kind of its own rules. Maybe you have gatekeepers you have to get past. For example, a gatekeeper could be an admin. It's like you're not going to get past this point without getting past them first. In terms of social networks, Minitel was actually the first one, and it was basically a phone-based internet. And it was founded in France, and this came long before the internet. What happened to it is that the center of it was the government, and so you had a star mesh pattern. And the problem is that in a social network, you need these four elements or your network is not going to survive. People need to trust it. People need to feel that they can still be individuals. They want privacy. Is it intimate? Meaning, what kind of esteem? What kind of, does it fulfill my needs? And is there civility? Because let's face it, you go to certain points and everybody's pointing fingers and calling each other names. It's like, I don't need it. And so the trust aspect is also security. And so when you're putting a network together, you have to look at, do I have these four things? An example is email marketing. You send emails to people. Well, if they don't have these four elements, they're not going to trust and like your emails. There's something called Dunbar's number, and that means that for everybody to know everybody else in a network, the rule is 150. The military uses this. I forgot if it's like company size or platoon size or something like that. And so this is the number of people you're able to comprehend. And subsequently this leads to the small world hypothesis that basically you can contact anybody through 5 to 7 links. In terms of how people are clustered together, Jennifer Dryden, who I'm actually going to see in a couple of weeks, she came up with her own theory about corporate governance, and that's that she worked for very large corporations. She said it's not difficult to get influence. And she said that in every major corporation, there are about 5 people who run the entire show. You get to know those 5 people, you can have power and influence. She had power and influence in Disney. She knew Michael Eisner, who was the CEO at the time. And does it make sense? Yeah, it does, because what are corporations? They tend to be hierarchical. And so if you connect to the top, which connects to everything else, you can reach it. How we measure social networks, it's through reach, the degree, structural wholes, and structural equivalence. And structural equivalence means that I could have another network which actually looks like this network. I mean, things can have the same kind of structure. But this slide's kind of self-explanatory. As you can see, I'm trying to speed it up. Some of the other measures we need to look at are things like betweenness, and that's that how many individuals kind of sit in the middle. Closeness is what's the shortest distance between 2 people. Why? Because that tends to be the most active. How much radiality do we have, and how much cohesion? And radiality is my network may be this big, but in reality maybe only this part is actually active, and so that's the level of influence. Here are some more definitions. I think it's self-explanatory. If you have any questions, just let me know. It's better than me just kind of reading off sentences. Global level density. And that's the proportion of ties you have compared to what the maximum is. So what you're really talking about is what is the efficiency of the network in terms of being able to create nodes. And eigenvector centrality is essentially some nodes are more important than others. And that's why, like, when they draw these diagrams, if you notice, some node points are bigger than others. For example, suppose I was running a node network of the United States. Well, New York City naturally would have a much more active and much more important node than, say, Des Moines, Iowa. And so, just summarizing it all, as you could see, it's all about nodes, how active they are, how large they are, the links, how much distance do I have to go, how influential can it be, how many connection points do I have in my network is about centrality, that you will find central points, because otherwise you would never have influencers. In the next video, we'll start to talk about critical mass.